They told her she was nothing, invisible, a mistake her father regretted until his dying breath. And when the will was read in that cold, rain-battered manner, Lydia Hale learned the truth. She'd inherited exactly what she deserved, nothing at all. But then the Duke walked in, uninvited, unwelcome, dangerous, and he said 3 words that shattered everything. She inherits me. This is the story of a girl the world tried to bury, and the man who bet his empire she'd rise instead. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Lydia's story can travel. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It hammered the windows of Hale Manor like fists demanding entry, turning the gravel drive into rivers of mud and the gardens into swamps. Inside, the drawing room smelled of damp wool, old leather, and something else, something sour and sharp that Lydia couldn't name but suspected was the scent of failure. She sat in the chair farthest from the fire, not because she wanted to be cold, but because sitting closer would have required someone to notice her first, and that hadn't happened in years. Across the room, her stepmother, Constance, perched on the settee like a queen holding court. Everything about her was arranged: hair, posture, expression, calculated to project tragedy without actually feeling it. Beside her, Lydia's half-sister Beatrice dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief that probably cost more than Lydia's entire wardrobe. "Poor father," Beatrice whispered, her voice pitched loud enough to carry. "He worked so hard, built so much, and now we honor his wishes," Constance cut in smoothly. "Mr. Pemberton, please proceed." The solicitor, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles, cleared his throat. He'd been clearing it for 10 minutes. Lydia suspected he'd rather be anywhere else, maybe drowning in the garden pond, maybe thrown from a moving carriage, anywhere but here, reading the will of a man who died owing half of London and trusting the other half even less. "Yes, quite." Mr. Pemberton unrolled the document with hands that shook slightly. "The last will and testament of Harold Winford Hale, dated the 14th of—" "Skip the preamble," Constance said. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. "We all know what it says." Lydia didn't. But then no one had asked her. Mr. Pemberton's gaze flicked to Lydia for half a second. Pity, maybe, or apology, then darted away. "Very well, to my beloved wife, Constance Margaret Hale, I leave the manor house, its contents, and an annual allowance of—" Constance's expression didn't change, but Beatrice actually smiled. "To my daughter, Beatrice Caroline Hale, I bequeath the sum of £10,000, to be held in trust until her marriage, along with my mother's jewelry and—" Lydia stopped listening. Not because she didn't care. She did, in the abstract way you care about storms happening to someone else, but because she already knew. Her father had made his feelings clear long before he'd had the decency to die. She was a disappointment, a reminder of his first wife, the one he'd actually loved. The one who died bringing Lydia into a world that didn't particularly want her. She'd spent 22 years being reminded she wasn't Beatrice, wasn't graceful, wasn't charming, wasn't worth the candles burned at dinner or the space she took up in the house. The only surprise would be if he'd left her anything at all. "And to my daughter, Lydia Ann Hale." Lydia's head snapped up. Mr. Pemberton looked ill. He adjusted his spectacles twice in quick succession. "I leave nothing." Silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that pressed against your eardrums and made your heart beat too loud. "Nothing?" Beatrice repeated, as if tasting the word. Then she laughed, a bright, delighted sound that bounced off the walls. "Oh, that's perfect. That's absolutely—" "Beatrice," Constance's tone could have frozen the rain mid-fall. Then turning to Lydia with something that might have been mistaken for sympathy if you didn't know better. "I'm sure your father had his reasons." Lydia said nothing. What was there to say? She'd expected this, prepared for it even, had spent the last month silently calculating how long she could survive as a governess, a companion, maybe a shop girl if she was lucky. The world didn't have many options for women with no money, no connections, and a father who'd declared them worthless in writing. Mr. Pemberton was still talking, something about debts, creditors, the estate being smaller than expected, much smaller, and arrangements that would need to be made. Lydia stood. No one noticed. She crossed to the door, her footsteps swallowed by the carpet and the rain, and Beatrice's continued commentary on how fitting it all was, really, given Lydia's complete lack of... The front door slammed open. The sound cracked through the house like a gunshot. Lydia froze, one hand on the drawing room door. Behind her, Constance made a small, startled noise. Mr. Pemberton dropped his papers. Heavy footsteps echoed in the entrance hall. Confident, unhurried, wrong. The butler appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Madam, I tried to stop him, but he..." A man stepped past him. Lydia had never seen him before, but she knew who he was. Everyone in England knew who he was. Rowan Blackmore, Duke of Ashford. He was taller than the doorway seemed to allow, dressed in black from his coat to his boots, rain dripping from his shoulders onto Constance's prized Turkish rug. His face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, sharper cheekbones, eyes the color of winter storms. He looked at the room the way a wolf looks at sheep. "Your Grace." Constance rose so quickly she nearly tripped. We weren't expecting, that is to say..." "No," Rowan said. His voice was low, rough-edged. "You weren't." He scanned the room, Constance frozen halfway between sitting and standing, Beatrice, her mouth open but silent for once, Mr. Pemberton clutching his papers like a shield. Then his gaze landed on Lydia. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His eyes pinned her in place, cataloging everything: her plain dress, her unpinned hair, the way she stood half in and half out of the room, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to exist. "Miss Hale," he said. It wasn't a question. Lydia managed a nod. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Your Grace." Constance stepped forward, her smile brittle. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion. Lydia was just leaving, and we're in the middle of private family business." "I know." Rowan's attention didn't leave Lydia's face. "I'm here because of the will." Mr. Pemberton made a sound like a stepped-on cat. "Your Grace, I assure you all legal protocols have been followed. Mr. Hale's wishes were quite clear." "Harold Hale," Rowan interrupted, "died owing me £50,000. The room went silent again. Constance's face turned the color of spoiled milk. Surely that's not..." "It is." Rowan pulled a folded document from his coat and tossed it onto the table. "A loan, taken out 8 years ago, secured against his estate, due in full upon his death." Mr. Pemberton grabbed the document with shaking hands, scanned it, and looked like he might be sick. I had no knowledge of this." Harold was very good at keeping secrets. Rowan's tone suggested he thought that was the only thing Harold had been good at. "The estate doesn't have £50,000. It doesn't have 5,000, which means everything here, the house, the furniture, the debts, belongs to me." Beatrice let out a strangled gasp. Constance looked ready to faint. Lydia just stared. Her mind had gone blank, wiped clean by the sheer impossibility of what was happening. "However," Rowan continued, and the word hung in the air like a blade, "I'm not here to collect furniture." He moved then, crossing the room in 3 long strides, until he stood directly in front of Lydia. This close, she could see the rain caught in his dark hair, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the absolute certainty in his eyes. "Harold Hale made me a promise," he said, quiet enough that only Lydia could hear. 22 years ago, and now I'm here to collect." Lydia's throat was dry. "I don't understand." "You will." He raised his voice, addressing the room. "Miss Lydia Hale inherits nothing from her father's estate. That much is true, but she does inherit something else." Constance found her voice. "What could she possibly..." "Me," Rowan said. Beatrice laughed, a short, hysterical bark. "What?" Rowan didn't look at her. His gaze stayed locked on Lydia. "There was a contract, made before you were born. Your father owed my father a debt he couldn't pay, so he paid it differently, with a promise that his firstborn daughter would marry into the Blackmore family." The floor seemed to tilt. "That's ridiculous," Constance sputtered. "You can't possibly expect..." "I expect," Rowan said, his tone cold enough to frost glass, "exactly what was agreed upon. The contract is legal, binding, witnessed by 3 solicitors and sealed by both families." He finally turned to face Constance. "Your stepdaughter doesn't inherit this house, Mrs. Hale. She inherits something considerably more valuable. My name, my fortune, my protection." He paused, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. And you inherit nothing but the debts your husband left behind. I suggest you start packing." The room erupted. Beatrice started shouting something about impossibility and cruelty and how this couldn't be legal. Constance stumbled toward Mr. Pemberton, demanding he do something, find a loophole, prove this madman wrong. Mr. Pemberton just kept reading the contract, his face growing paler with each line, and Lydia stood frozen, staring at the Duke of Ashford, the most powerful man in England, who just walked into her father's house and claimed her like property. Rowan extended his hand. "Miss Hale, we're leaving." She didn't take it, couldn't. Her mind was spinning too fast, catching on words like contract and binding and protection, which was just another word for prison, wasn't it? "I don't—" She swallowed, tried again. "I don't even know you." "No," he agreed, "but you knew your father, and you know what happens to women with no money and no prospects." His expression didn't soften, but something in his eyes did, just a fraction. "You have a choice, Miss Hale. Come with me, or stay here and take your chances with your stepmother's mercy." Behind her, Constance was shrieking about lawyers and fraud, and how dare he— Lydia looked at the hand Rowan offered, looked at the man attached to it, dangerous, cold, terrifying in ways she couldn't even name yet. Then she looked at Constance, at Beatrice, at the house that had never been a home, at the future that looked like a slow drowning in someone else's cruelty. She'd spent 22 years being nothing. Maybe it was time to try being something else. Lydia placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm despite the rain, steady despite the chaos. "Smart choice," he murmured. Then he turned, pulling her toward the door, ignoring Constance's protests and Beatrice's shrieks and Mr. Pemberton's stuttered attempts at legal intervention. A carriage waited outside, black as a hearse, water streaming off its sides. The driver didn't blink at the sight of Rowan hauling a soaked, terrified girl through the rain. He just opened the door. Rowan handed her up first, then climbed in behind her, pulling the door shut on the sound of Constance screaming threats into the storm. The interior was warm, dry, lined with velvet the color of blood. Lydia pressed herself into the corner as far from Rowan as the space allowed. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her dress was soaked through. She couldn't stop shaking. "Where are we going?" Her voice cracked. Rowan settled into the opposite seat, his expression unreadable. "Home." "I don't have a home." "You do now." The carriage lurched forward. Lydia watched through the rain-streaked window as Hale Manor disappeared into the storm, the only life she'd ever known, shrinking and fading until it was nothing but a dark shape in the distance. Gone. She turned to face the Duke. "The contract. This promise my father made. I want to see it." Rowan studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a sheaf of papers, yellowed with age but still legible. He handed them over without a word. Lydia read by the dim carriage light, her hands trembling. It was all there. Her father's signature. Lord Blackmore's signature. Rowan's father, she assumed. Witnesses. Seals. Legal language that boiled down to something simple and horrible. In exchange for the forgiveness of debts totaling £30,000, Harold Hale promised his firstborn daughter in marriage to the Blackmore heir. She'd been sold before she was born. This is— She couldn't find the word. Monstrous? Medieval? Insane? Binding, Rowan supplied. He didn't sound pleased about it. He didn't sound anything. "I had no intention of enforcing it. My father's been dead for 10 years, and I'm not in the habit of collecting human debts. But then your father died, and I discovered he'd spent the last 2 decades bleeding money from my estate through a dozen different schemes. £50,000, Miss Hale. That's what your loving father stole from me." I didn't know." "I know you didn't." Something shifted in his expression. "But you're his daughter. His heir, legally speaking, to his debts as much as his assets, which means you owe me £50,000. Lydia's laugh came out broken. "I have nothing. You heard the will. I'm worth exactly nothing." "True." Rowan leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. "Which is why I'm offering you an alternative. Honor the contract your father signed. Marry me, and your debt is forgiven. And if I refuse, then I claim the debt through legal channels. Debtor's prison for you, Mrs. Hale and your sister out on the street, and everything your father ever owned sold at auction. He tilted his head slightly. I won't enjoy it, but I'll do it. The rain pounded the roof. The wheels churned through mud. Lydia looked down at the contract again, at her father's signature, bold and careless, selling her future for the price of his mistakes. Why? The word came out raw. If you never wanted this, if you think this whole arrangement is as terrible as I do, why not just let it go? Forgive the debt. Walk away. Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I need a wife. You're a duke. You could marry anyone. I could marry someone my equals would approve of. Someone polished and perfect and politically useful. His tone made it clear what he thought of that. Someone who'd spend my money and bear my heirs and smile at the right people while slowly bleeding me dry of anything resembling peace. And you think I won't do that? I think, Rowan said slowly, that you're the only person in England who might hate this arrangement as much as I do, which makes you the only person I can trust not to want more than what we agree on. Lydia stared at him. What do we agree on? Protection, security, freedom from your stepmother and my social obligations. He straightened. I need a duchess in name only. Someone to manage the household, appear at necessary functions, and otherwise leave me alone. In exchange, you get wealth, safety, and independence. A business arrangement, nothing more. Marriage is supposed to be more than business. Marriage, Rowan said flatly, is a transaction. At least this way we're both honest about it. The carriage hit a rut. Lydia grabbed the edge of the seat to keep from sliding. When she looked up, Rowan was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. I'm not asking you to love me, Miss Hale. I'm asking you to survive. And there it was. The truth underneath all the legal language and cold contracts. He was offering her a life. Not the one she'd imagine, not love or happiness or anything soft, but a life where she wouldn't be erased, where she wouldn't disappear into servitude or poverty or whatever dark corner the world reserved for forgotten daughters. How long? She asked. What? The marriage. How long does it last? Rowan's jaw tightened. Until one of us dies. Those are the terms. That's not a business arrangement. That's a life sentence. Yes. He didn't apologize for it. It is. The carriage rolled on through the storm. Lydia closed her eyes, tried to think, but her mind kept circling back to the same impossible choice. Marry a stranger who saw her as a solution to a problem, or face a world that saw her as nothing at all. When she opened her eyes, Rowan was still watching her. If I say yes, she said carefully, I want conditions. His eyebrows rose, barely, but enough. Go on. I want my own rooms, my own space. I won't be locked away like some shameful secret. Agreed. I want access to books, a library. You'll have the run of mine, and I want... She hesitated because this felt like asking for the moon. I want to be useful, not ornamental. If I'm going to be your duchess, I want actual responsibilities. Things that matter. For the first time since he'd walked into her father's house, Rowan smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. You can have the entire estate to manage if you want it. Most of the staff would probably thank you. Why? Because I'm terrible at it. The smile faded. I'm good at business, at investments and negotiations and making money. But running a household, managing servants and menus and social calendars? He shook his head. I'd rather be drawn and quartered. Despite everything, the fear, the shock, the absolute insanity of this situation, Lydia almost laughed. Then we might actually be useful to each other. That's the idea. The carriage began to slow. Rowan glanced out the window, then back at her. We're here. Where? Blackmore Hall. The name meant nothing to Lydia. She'd heard of it, everyone had, but she'd never seen it, never imagined she would. The carriage stopped. A footman appeared to open the door, an umbrella already raised against the rain. Rowan stepped out first, then turned to offer Lydia his hand again. She took it. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle, but it was still enough to soak through her already damp dress in seconds. Through the wet darkness, she could make out shapes, massive stone walls, towers, windows glowing with warm light. It looked like a fortress. Rowan kept his hand at her elbow, guiding her up wide steps to a door that swung open before they reached it. Inside was warmth, light, the smell of wood smoke and something cooking, meat, bread, herbs. A woman appeared, older, gray-haired, with sharp eyes and a sharper expression. She looked Lydia up and down once, then turned to Rowan. "Your Grace, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Plans changed, Mrs. Harrow." Rowan released Lydia's arm. "This is Miss Lydia Hale. She'll be staying here, permanently." Mrs. Harrow's eyes widened fractionally, the most emotion she seemed capable of. "I see. Shall I prepare the West Wing?" "The Duchess's chambers." Silence. Mrs. Harrow looked at Lydia again, this time with something that might have been respect or pity. It was hard to tell. "Very good, Your Grace. I'll have them ready within the hour." She snapped her fingers, and two maids appeared from nowhere. "Draw a bath. Find appropriate clothing. See that Miss Hale has everything she needs." The maids curtsied and gestured for Lydia to follow. She looked back at Rowan. He nodded once. "Go. Rest. We'll talk in the morning." There were 1,000 questions she wanted to ask, 1,000 protests that still needed voicing. But she was cold, exhausted. And this, whatever this was, wasn't going to be resolved tonight. So she followed the maids up a curving staircase, down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced Blackmores, into a suite of rooms that were larger than the entire ground floor of Hale Manor. The bath was already being filled. One of the maids, young, with kind eyes, helped Lydia out of her soaked dress. "Don't worry, miss," she whispered. "His Grace isn't as frightening as he looks." Lydia wasn't sure she believed that, but she let herself be guided into the bath anyway. Let the hot water chase away the cold. Let herself pretend, just for a moment, that this might not be a complete disaster. Downstairs, Rowan stood in the entrance hall, rain still dripping from his coat. Mrs. Harrow approached, her voice low. "The staff will talk." "Let them. They'll ask questions." "Then answer them." He turned toward his study. "Miss Hale is to be treated with the full respect owed to the Duchess of Ashford. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their final wages in the morning." "And the wedding?" Rowan paused. 3 weeks. Make the arrangements." 3 weeks isn't enough time. It'll have to be." He didn't wait for a response, just kept walking, leaving Mrs. Harrow staring after him with an expression that said she'd seen a lot in her years of service, but this was something new. In the study, Rowan poured himself a drink, whiskey, neat, and stood at the window watching the rain. He'd told Lydia the truth. Most of it, anyway. He did need a wife. He was tired of the constant pressure to marry for politics or money or bloodline. Tired of women who looked at him and saw a title, not a person. But there was another reason. One he hadn't mentioned. The contract wasn't just about marriage. It was about protection. Harold Hale had made enemies, powerful ones. And those enemies would come looking for payment, one way or another. If Lydia stayed unprotected, she'd be destroyed. Rowan knew what it felt like to be used as leverage. He'd watched his father sell pieces of their family's dignity for debts and favors, watched his mother wither under the weight of a marriage that was transaction instead of partnership. He wouldn't do that to Lydia, but he also wouldn't pretend this was anything other than what it was. A cage. Gilded, comfortable, safe. But still a cage. The whiskey burned going down. 3 weeks. Then the girl who was nothing would become a duchess, and they'd both have to live with what that meant. The bed was too soft. Lydia lay awake in the darkness, staring at a ceiling she couldn't see, surrounded by silence so complete it felt like drowning. At Hale Manor, there'd always been noise, creaking floors, Beatrice's voice carrying through walls, Constance's sharp footsteps on the stairs. Background noise that reminded you that you existed, even if no one cared that you did. Here, there was nothing, just her and the vast emptiness of rooms that belonged to a duchess. A duchess. The word tasted wrong in her mouth, like borrowed clothes that didn't fit. She rolled onto her side, pulling the blankets tighter. The maids had left her in a nightgown that probably cost more than she'd eaten in a year, silk so fine it felt like water against her skin. They'd been kind, efficient, called her Miss Hale in voices that suggested they knew exactly what was happening and had opinions they'd never voice. Tomorrow, she'd have to face Rowan. Face whatever this arrangement actually meant beyond contracts and cold transactions. Tomorrow, She'd have to figure out how to be someone she wasn't. But tonight, a knock shattered the silence. Lydia sat up so fast her head spun. Yes? The door opened a crack. One of the maids from earlier, the young one with kind eyes, peeked in. Miss Hale, sorry to disturb, but His Grace requests your presence. In the library. Now? Lydia glanced at the window, still dark. What time is it? midnight, miss. Of course it was. Lydia pushed back the covers, her feet hitting cold floor. Does he always summon people in the middle of the night? The maid's expression flickered, something between amusement and sympathy. Only when he can't sleep, which is most nights, if I'm honest. She held up a robe. Here. It's not proper calling clothes, but I don't think His Grace cares much about proper. That much was obvious. Lydia let the maid help her into the robe, velvet, deep green, ridiculously warm, and followed her down hallways that seemed to stretch forever. Portraits watched from the walls. Dead Blackmores with their stern faces and colder eyes, judging her for daring to walk among them. The library door stood open, firelight spilling into the hallway. The maid curtsied and disappeared. Lydia hesitated at the threshold. The room beyond was massive. 2 stories of books climbing toward a ceiling painted with constellations she didn't recognize. Leather chairs clustered near the fire. Tables covered in papers, maps, ledgers. And Rowan, standing at the window with a glass in his hand, silhouetted against the dying rain. You wanted to see me? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He turned. He'd changed out of his wet clothes into something simpler. Shirt, trousers, no coat. His hair was still damp, curling slightly at his temples. He looked tired, almost human. Can't sleep? He asked. The bed's too soft. His mouth quirked. First complaint I've ever heard about expensive bedding. I'm not complaining, just stating fact. She stepped into the room, her bare feet silent on thick carpet. Why am I here? Because we need to talk. Actually talk, without rain and carriages and Mrs. Harrow hovering. He gestured to one of the chairs. Sit. It wasn't quite an order, but close enough that Lydia bristled. Still, she sat. Rowan took the chair opposite, the fire crackling between them. 3 weeks, he said without preamble. That's how long we have before the wedding. 3 weeks to make this arrangement work. Or what? Or it falls apart spectacularly, and we both end up worse than where we started. He took a drink. I meant what I said in the carriage. This is a business arrangement, but business requires rules, expectations. We need to establish those now. Lydia folded her hands in her lap. I'm listening. First, the marriage is real in every legal sense. You'll be the Duchess of Ashford with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. You'll manage the household, appear at social functions when necessary, and represent this family with dignity. Dignity, Lydia repeated. That's what you want? Someone who looks the part? I want someone who won't make this harder than it already is. His tone sharpened. You'll have access to everything, my money, my properties, my name. In exchange, I expect competence. Competence. She let the word hang. Not obedience? If I wanted obedience, I'd have bought a dog. He leaned forward, firelight catching the scar through his eyebrow. I told you. I need someone to manage things I don't have patience for. The staff, the estate accounts, the social calendar. You said you wanted to be useful. Prove it. Something hot flared in Lydia's chest. Not quite anger, but close. You don't know anything about me. How do you know I'm even capable of... Because you're Harold Hale's daughter. Rowan's expression didn't change. Your father was a bastard and a thief, but he wasn't stupid. He ran an estate for 20 years on debts and lies, kept creditors at bay, maintained appearances. Someone taught him that, and someone in that house learned by watching. Lydia went still. It wasn't Constance, Rowan continued. She's too busy performing tragedy to actually manage anything, and it wasn't Beatrice. She can barely manage to dress herself, which means it was you, the invisible daughter, the one nobody noticed doing all the work. He'd seen more in one evening than her family had in 22 years. I kept the household accounts, Lydia admitted quietly. After my father's first stroke. Someone had to, and Constance wouldn't lower herself. So I learned. Good. Then you already know what you're doing. He refilled his glass from a decanter on the side table. This estate is 10 times the size of Hale Manor. with 3 times the staff and business interests across half of England. It's a mess. My steward does his best, but he's old and overwhelmed, and I'm too busy keeping the financial empire from collapsing to manage menus and servant schedules. So I'm to be your estate manager. You're to be my wife. His eyes met hers. But yes, manage the estate. Make it run smoothly. Keep the staff from murdering each other. In return, you get everything I promised. Safety, wealth, freedom to live however you want within these walls. Lydia studied him. And outside these walls? What about it? You said within these walls. What happens when I want to leave? Rowan was quiet for a beat too long. Where would you go? I don't know. London, the village, anywhere that isn't locked inside this fortress. She kept her voice level. You're offering me a cage, Your Grace. A beautiful one, but still a cage. I need to know, am I a prisoner here? No. The word came hard. You're not a prisoner. You can go where you want, when you want, but... He stopped, jaw working. But what? But your father made enemies, dangerous ones, men who'd use you as leverage if they knew you existed. He set down his glass with a sharp click. The contract wasn't just about settling debts. It was about protection. Your father knew what was coming. He sold you to my family because he thought we could keep you safe. Cold spread through Lydia's stomach. Safe from what? Creditors who don't accept no as an answer. Business partners he betrayed. People who lost fortunes because of his schemes. Rowan's expression was stone. They'll come looking, Lydia, and when they do, they'll look for anything they can use against his estate. That includes his daughters. Beatrice is Constance's problem now, and Constance is smart enough to disappear into some relative's house and wait for the storm to pass. He leaned back. But you're the firstborn, the legitimate heir to Harold's debts and sins. You're the one they'll want. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. So this protection you're offering, Lydia said slowly, isn't kindness. It's necessity. It's both. Rowan didn't flinch from her stare. I won't lie to you. This arrangement serves me as much as it serves you, but that doesn't make the protection less real. As my wife, you're untouchable. No creditor, no matter how powerful, would dare move against a duchess. And if I refuse, if I walk away right now, then you're on your own. He said it flatly, without malice. I'll forgive the debt. I'm not a monster, but I can't protect someone who won't let me. You'll be out there alone with your father's enemies circling. Lydia's hands clenched in her lap. That's not a choice. That's coercion. That's reality. Rowan stood, crossing to the window. Rain streaked the glass in thin rivulets. I'm not asking you to love this. I'm asking you to survive it. 3 weeks, Lydia. Then you'll be safe, truly safe, for the rest of your life. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw something at his head and tell him he was exactly like her father, selling her future for his convenience. But he wasn't. Not quite. Her father had sold her and forgotten she existed. Rowan was offering her a position, power, a voice, even if it came wrapped in chains. The staff, she said finally. If I'm to manage them, I need authority, real authority, not just a title they humor. Rowan turned. You'll have it. And the accounts. I want full access. No secrets. Done. And she hesitated because this felt like pushing too far. And I want to know what you're not telling me about my father, about these enemies. If I'm walking into danger, I deserve to know what it looks like. Rowan studied her for a long moment. Then he crossed back to his chair, sat, and began to talk. He told her about Harold Hale's schemes, investments that were actually frauds, partnerships that were thefts, loans taken with no intention of repayment. He told her about the men Harold had ruined, a shipping magnate who'd lost everything, a banker who'd put a pistol in his mouth, a lord who'd been forced to sell his ancestral estate. He told her about the threats, letters demanding payment, visits in the night, warnings that Harold's family would suffer for his crimes. And he told her about the contract, made 22 years ago when Harold's debts had finally caught up to him. A promise to the Duke of Ashford, marry your daughter to my son, and I'll make your enemies disappear. My father kept that promise, Rowan said. Every man who threatened Harold Hale either backed off or met with unfortunate accidents. Your father lived another 20 years because mine protected him. And now you're collecting what he paid for. Now I'm honoring what he bought. Rowan's voice was quiet. My father wasn't a good man, Lydia, but he kept his word. The contract promised you safety. I intend to deliver. The fire had burned low, embers glowing red in the darkness. Lydia felt hollowed out. Every answer just revealed more questions, more layers of lies and debts, and promises made by people who'd never asked what she wanted. Did my mother know? The question came out raw. About the contract? Rowan shook his head. She died before it could matter. Harold told me once that she would have fought him on it. That's why he waited until after to sign. Of course he had. Lydia stood. Her legs felt shaky, but she locked her knees and kept her spine straight. I need air. It's raining. I don't care. She walked past him, through the library, out into the hall, found a door that led to what looked like a terrace, pushed it open and stepped into the cold. The rain had softened to mist, clinging to her skin and hair. Below, gardens stretched into darkness, shapes and shadows that might have been beautiful in daylight. Behind her, footsteps. Rowan appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. You'll catch cold. Then I'll catch cold. She didn't look at him. I spent 22 years being told where to stand, how to speak, what to want. I'm not starting that again. I'm not trying to control you. Aren't you? She turned, and the anger she'd been holding broke free. You show up, drag me out of my life, tell me I have to marry you or face ruin, and call it protection. You make decisions about my future without asking what I think. You offer me freedom with one hand and lock the door with the other. Her voice shook. How is that different from what my father did? Rowan took the words without flinching. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then, you're right. Lydia blinked. What? You're right. He stepped onto this terrace, letting the door close behind him. I walked into your house like I owned you, made demands, assumed you'd just accept it, because it was easier than asking. So why didn't you ask? Because I didn't think you'd say yes. He moved to the railing, gripping it with both hands. If I'd walked up to you and said, your father sold you to my family, would you like to honor that contract? What would you have said? No. Exactly. He looked at her then, and something in his expression cracked. I needed you to see the alternative first, needed you to understand that this wasn't me against you. It was both of us against everything else. But I did it wrong. I know that. The mist settled on his shoulders, darkening his shirt. I can't undo the contract, he said. I can't make your father's enemies disappear. I can't give you back the life you should have had, but I can give you a choice. A real one. What choice? Stay or go. He straightened. If you walk away right now, I'll honor what I said. No debt, no threats. You'll have enough money to start over somewhere far from here. I'll make sure you're safe even if you're not my wife. Lydia's breath caught. You'd do that? I'd hate it. It would make everything infinitely more complicated. His mouth twisted. But yes, I'd do that. Because you're right, forcing you into this makes me no better than the men who hurt you before. The rain picked up again, fat drops pattering on stone. Lydia looked out at the dark gardens, thought about running, starting over, being free. But free to do what? Become a governess and spend her life raising other people's children? Marry some merchant who'd see her as property? Disappear into poverty and obscurity? At least here, she'd have power, resources, a chance to be something other than invisible. If I stay, she said slowly, I want your word. No more surprises. No more decisions made without me. We're partners in this, or we're nothing. Partners, Rowan tested the word. That means you trust me. That means you earn my trust. She turned to face him fully. Starting now. He held out his hand, not demanding, offering. Partners, he agreed. Lydia looked at his hand, thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways she could lose herself in this arrangement. Then she thought about the alternative. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm despite the rain. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he echoed. They stood there in the rain, holding on, two people bound by a contract neither wanted, but both needed. Inside, a clock struck 1. Rowan released her hand. Come on, you're soaked. So are you. I'm used to it. But he moved toward the door anyway, holding it open. Lydia followed him inside. Water dripped from her hair onto marble floors. Her robe clung to her shoulders. Tomorrow, Rowan said, Mrs. Harrow will introduce you to the staff. You'll start learning the estate, how things work, who does what. And you? I have business in London. I'll be gone most of the week. He paused. Will you be all right here alone? Alone? The word should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like relief. I'll manage, she said. His expression softened, just slightly. I believe you will. He left her at the base of the grand staircase, disappearing down a hallway without looking back. Lydia climbed the stairs slowly, her wet feet leaving prints on the carpet. At the top, she paused, looking back at the entrance hall below. Massive, empty, hers. In 3 weeks, she'd be a duchess. The thought still felt impossible, but maybe, just maybe, she could make it real. Morning came too early. A maid, different from last night, older with iron gray hair, appeared with tea and toast and a dress that actually fit. She introduced herself as Anne and explained the morning routine with brisk efficiency. Breakfast at 8, household meeting at 9, tour of the estate at 10. His Grace left at dawn, Anne added, helping Lydia into the dress. Deep blue wool, simple but well made. Said you're in charge until he returns. Lydia's hand stilled on the buttons. In charge? Of the household, miss. Mrs. Harrow runs the staff, but you approve decisions. Anne stepped back, examining her work. You'll do fine. Mrs. Harrow's bark is worse than her bite. Lydia doubted that. The household meeting took place in what Anne called the morning room, a space designed for sunlight that currently held nothing but gray sky and 30 pairs of eyes staring at Lydia like she was something caught in a trap. Mrs. Harrow stood at the head of the table. This is Miss Lydia Hale. In 3 weeks, she'll be Her Grace the Duchess of Ashford. Until then, and after, she holds authority over household matters. You'll treat her with appropriate respect. Her gaze swept the room, daring anyone to argue. Questions? Silence. Then a voice from the back. What's she know about running a place like this? Mrs. Harrow's expression could have frozen fire. Mr. Davies, if you'd like to explain yourself. It's all right. Lydia stood. Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice level. It's a fair question. The man who'd spoken, Davies apparently, was tall, broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of someone who worked outdoors. The groundskeeper, Lydia guessed. She met his stare. I don't know everything about running an estate this size. I won't pretend I do, but I know accounts, I know inventory, I know how to balance books and manage budgets and make sure people get paid on time. She paused. What I don't know, I'll learn, and I'll listen to anyone willing to teach me. Davy's expression didn't change. And if we think you're making a mistake, then tell me. I'd rather fix a problem than pretend it doesn't exist. She looked around the table. His Grace said this place is a mess. If that's true, we fix it together. If it's not, if you're all doing fine without interference, then I stay out of your way. But either way, I'm not here to make your lives harder. Another silence. This one felt different. Mrs. Harrow cleared her throat. Well then, let's begin. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Lydia learned about servant schedules, meal planning, supply orders, maintenance needs, and a dozen other details that made her head spin. But she took notes, asked questions, remembered names. By the time it ended, Davies hadn't smiled, but he'd stopped glaring. The estate tour came next. Mrs. Harrow led Lydia through rooms that seemed to multiply the longer they walked. Ballrooms, dining halls, sitting rooms, guest wings, servants' quarters, the library she'd already seen. The kitchens were massive, brick ovens, copper pots, a staff of 6 just for cooking. We used to host regularly, Mrs. Harrow explained, her tone suggesting she had opinions about that. Before the old Duke died. After that, His Grace shut down most of the social calendar. Why? You'd have to ask him. Mrs. Harrow's expression was carefully neutral. But between you and me, I think he's allergic to small talk. Lydia almost laughed. They ended in the Duchess's study, a room Lydia hadn't seen before. Smaller than the library, but well lit, with a desk positioned near the window and shelves lined with ledgers. This was the late Duchess's space, Mrs. Harrow said. His Grace's mother. She managed the estate from here, kept everything running while the old Duke drank himself to death. She ran her fingers over the desk's edge. She was formidable. You remind me of her. Lydia wasn't sure if that was a compliment. How so? You don't apologize for existing. Mrs. Harrow's eyes were sharp. Most girls your age would have crumbled under what happened yesterday. You didn't. You got angry instead. That's good. Anger keeps you alive. Is that what kept her alive? For a while. Mrs. Harrow's expression softened. Then she had a son who needed protecting, and anger wasn't enough anymore. She left Lydia alone in the study. Lydia sat at the desk, running her hands over smooth wood. The ledgers on the shelves were dated, some going back 40 years. She pulled one down at random. The late Duchess's handwriting filled the pages. Neat columns of numbers, notes in the margins, a record of every shilling spent. Lydia opened another, and another. By the time the sun set, what little sun there'd been, she'd read through 5 years of household accounts and understood something crucial. The estate wasn't a mess. It was bleeding money. Expenses had tripled in the last decade while income stayed flat. Servants were overpaid for their positions. Suppliers were charging rates that made no sense. Maintenance costs kept climbing with nothing to show for it. Someone was stealing. Lydia sat back, her mind racing. This was what Rowan wanted her to find. Had to be. He'd said the estate was a mess, that he didn't have time to manage it, but he was too smart not to notice missing money. He'd brought her here to fix it, or to take the fall when she couldn't. The thought sent ice through her veins. She stood, pacing to the window. Outside, darkness had swallowed the gardens. Her reflection stared back at her, pale face, borrowed dress, eyes too wide. What if this was a trap? What if Rowan had chosen her specifically because she was disposable, someone he could blame when the theft was discovered, someone with no connections or power to fight back? What if she'd walked straight from one cage into another? The door opened. Lydia spun. Mrs. Harrow stood in the doorway holding a tea tray. You've been in here for 7 hours, miss. Thought you might need sustenance. 7? Lydia looked at the clock. 10:30. I didn't realize. Most people don't when they're reading ledgers. Mrs. Harrow set down the tray. Find anything interesting? Lydia hesitated. Trust was a risk, but so was silence. Someone stealing from the estate. Mrs. Harrow's expression didn't change. I know. You... Lydia stared. You know? I've suspected for years, but I can't prove it, and I don't have authority to investigate. She poured tea with steady hands. That's why His Grace brought you here, to do what I can't. What if I can't either? Then we're all in trouble. Mrs. Harrow handed her a cup. But I don't think you'll fail. You've got that look. What look? The one that says you'd rather burn the house down than let someone make a fool of you. Mrs. Harrow's smile was thin. Like I said, you remind me of her. Lydia sipped the tea. It was strong, bitter, exactly what she needed. If I'm going to investigate, she said slowly, I need information. Who handles the money? Who has access to the accounts? The steward, Mr. Pembroke. He's been here 30 years, loyal, honest, but old and tired. He relies on his assistants too much. Assistants? 2 of them, Jonathan Reed and Thomas Ashworth. Reed handles purchasing and supplier contracts. Ashworth manages payroll and household expenses. Mrs. Harrow's tone turned dry. Both young, both ambitious, both entirely too smooth for my taste. You think one of them is responsible? I think they're both worth investigating. Mrs. Harrow stood. But be careful, miss. Thieves don't like being caught, especially thieves with connections. She left Lydia alone again. Lydia stared at the ledgers scattered across the desk, thought about Rowan's words. Make it run smoothly. Prove you're useful. He'd given her a test. Now she had to pass it, or prove he was right to doubt her. The next morning, Lydia requested a meeting with Mr. Pembroke. He arrived looking exactly like Mrs. Harrow had described. Old, tired, vaguely confused about why the future Duchess wanted to discuss accounts. I'm trying to understand the household finances, Lydia explained, keeping her tone light. His Grace mentioned there might be inefficiencies. I thought I could help identify them. Pembroke relaxed. Oh, of course. Happy to assist, Miss Hale. What would you like to know? They spent 2 hours going through records. Pembroke was thorough, patient, and clearly overwhelmed. He kept apologizing for confusion, for missing receipts, for delays in payments. Reed and Ashworth handle most of the daily management now, he admitted. I oversee, but my eyes aren't what they used to be. His Grace knows this. He's been kind enough to let me stay on despite my limitations. I'm sure he values your experience. Perhaps. Pembroke looked uncertain, though I worry I'm becoming more burden than asset. Lydia made sympathetic noises and asked to meet the assistants. Reed came first, handsome, polished, with a smile that came too easily. He answered Lydia's questions smoothly, explaining purchasing decisions with confidence that bordered on arrogance. The suppliers we use are the best available, he assured her. Quality costs money, Miss Hale. His Grace understands that. Does he review the contracts? He trusts me to handle that level of detail. Reed's smile widened. I wouldn't want to waste his time with minutiae. Ashworth was different, quieter, more nervous. He kept checking his notes, double-checking figures, apologizing for things that didn't need apology. The payroll is complex, he said, hands twisting together. Many staff, different pay scales, bonuses for long service. Sometimes mistakes happen. What kind of mistakes? Oh, small things, a few extra pounds here or there, nothing significant. He laughed, but it sounded strained. I always correct them when I find them. Lydia thanked them both and sent them away. Then she went back to the ledgers. It took 3 more days of reading, cross-referencing, and comparing records. 3 days of numbers blurring together until her eyes burned and her head pounded. But she found it. Reed's supplier contracts were inflated, charging twice the market rate for goods and services. The extra money was going somewhere, but the records didn't show where. Ashworth's payroll had ghost employees, names that appeared on payment lists, but nowhere else in the household records. Money vanishing into empty pockets. Together, they'd stolen nearly 20,000 pounds over 5 years. Lydia sat back, her hands shaking. This was enough to ruin them, enough to send them to prison. But it was also enough to make them dangerous. She needed proof, real proof. Not just ledger discrepancies, but evidence that would hold up if they fought back. She needed help. She needed Rowan. But Rowan was in London, and she was here alone with 2 thieves who didn't know they'd been caught yet. Lydia closed the ledger and stood. Tomorrow, she'd confront them. Tonight, she'd prepare. Because if this went wrong, if they were more dangerous than she thought, she needed to be ready. She walked to the door, opened it, and found Anne waiting in the hall. Miss, you look pale. Are you all right? Lydia forced a smile. I'm fine, just tired. You should rest. You've been working too hard. Soon, Lydia touched her arm. Anne, can I ask you something? If you needed to hide something valuable in this house, something you didn't want found, where would you put it? Anne's eyes widened. That's an odd question, miss. I know, but it's important. Anne studied her for a long moment. Then, the old Duke's study, 3rd floor, west wing. It's been locked for 10 years. No one goes there anymore. Why not? Because His Grace forbade it. Anne lowered her voice. After his father died, he locked that room and said anyone caught inside would be dismissed. No exceptions. Lydia's pulse quickened. Thank you. She climbed to the 3rd floor, found the west wing, stood in front of a door that looked like all the others except for one detail. The lock was new. Someone had been here recently, someone who wanted to make sure the room stayed sealed. Lydia tried the handle. Locked, as expected. She stood there, weighing options. She could wait for Rowan, could ask permission, or she could prove she was worth the risk he'd taken. She went back downstairs, found a maid, and asked for the housekeeper's keys. I need to inventory the locked rooms, she lied smoothly. His Grace's orders. The maid hesitated, then handed them over. Lydia returned to the 3rd floor, found the key that fit, turned it. The door opened onto darkness. She lit a candle from the hallway sconce and stepped inside. The room was a tomb, dust-covered furniture, curtains drawn, air thick and stale. A desk dominated the center, papers scattered across its surface like the occupant had left mid-thought and never returned. Lydia moved to the desk. Open drawers, Found more papers, old letters, receipts from decades ago. And in the bottom drawer, hidden under a false bottom, a ledger. She pulled it out carefully, opened it. The handwriting was different from the Duchess's. Harsh, angular, angry. The old Duke's, she guessed. She scanned the entries, saw familiar names. Reed, Ashworth, saw payments made to them, kickbacks, bribes. The theft hadn't started 5 years ago. It had started 20 years ago, with Rowan's father. The candle flickered. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Lydia spun, heart in her throat. A figure stood in the doorway. Reed. His easy smile was gone. In its place, something cold and calculating. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Hale." Lydia's fingers tightened on the ledger. The candle flame threw shadows across Reed's face, making him look less like the polished assistant and more like something that had crawled out from under the floorboards. "I could say the same to you," she managed, keeping her voice steady. "This room's been locked for 10 years. Which makes me wonder how you got in." Reed stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click that felt final. "The housekeeper's keys, I'm guessing? Clever, but not clever enough to check if anyone was watching." He'd followed her. She'd been so focused on finding proof that she hadn't thought about being followed. Stupid, careless. "His Grace asked me to review the estate finances." Lydia lifted her chin. "I'm doing exactly what I was brought here to do." "You were brought here to be a pretty ornament, a wife in name only." Reed's smile was thin. "Did Rowan actually tell you to dig through his father's private papers, or are you overstepping?" The use of Rowan's first name, casual, familiar, sent warning bells through Lydia's mind. "How long have you worked here?" she asked. "Long enough to know where all the bodies are buried." He leaned against the door, arms crossed. 20 years, Miss Hale. Since I was 14. The old Duke took me in, gave me a position, taught me how the world really works." "He taught you how to steal." Reed laughed. A short, harsh sound. "He taught me how to survive. There's a difference. Not to the law. The law." Reed's expression hardened. "The law protects men like Rowan Blackmore. Men born into wealth they didn't earn, holding power they don't deserve. The rest of us? We take what we can, or we starve." "You're not starving. You've stolen 20,000 pounds. Closer to 30, actually." He said it without shame. "And I earned every shilling." "Do you know what it's like working for the Blackmores? The old Duke was a drunk who beat his wife and terrorized his staff. Rowan's no better, cold, ruthless, willing to sell a woman to settle his father's debts. He's protecting me. He's using you." Reed pushed off the door, taking a step closer. "You think this marriage is about protection? It's about control, about maintaining the Blackmore legacy no matter who gets crushed in the process. You're just another transaction to him." Lydia's pulse hammered in her throat, but she held her ground. "If that's true, why do you care? If I'm just a transaction, what difference does it make if I find your theft?" "Because you'll tell him, and he'll use it as an excuse to destroy anyone connected to his father's sins, including people who were just trying to survive." Reed's voice dropped. "Walk away, Miss Hale. Burn that ledger. Forget what you saw. And maybe, you'll actually survive your 3 weeks until the wedding." The threat was clear. Lydia's mind raced. She was alone on the 3rd floor with a man who just admitted to 30,000 pounds of theft. No one knew where she was. No one would hear her scream. But she'd spent 22 years being afraid. She was done with that. "No," she said quietly. Reed's expression flickered, surprise, then anger. "You're making a mistake." "Probably." Lydia tucked the ledger under her arm. "But it's my mistake to make. Now move." "Or what? You'll report me?" He laughed again. "To whom? Rowan's in London. Mrs. Harrow has no authority over me, and the local magistrate is a friend of mine, has been for years. Your word against mine, Miss Hale. Who do you think wins that fight?" He had a point. A good one. But Lydia had spent too many years being told she didn't matter to back down now. "Then I guess we'll find out." She moved toward the door. Reed shifted, blocking her path. "I don't want to hurt you." "Then don't." They stood inches apart, the air thick with tension. Then Reed reached for the ledger. Lydia swung the candle. The flame caught his sleeve. He jerked back with a curse, batting at the sparks. Lydia shoved past him, yanked the door open, and ran. Behind her, Reed shouted something, a threat, a warning. She didn't stop to listen. She just ran, the ledger clutched to her chest, her bare feet sliding on polished floors. Down the hallway, down the stairs. She could hear him following, his heavier footsteps echoing. Second floor, first floor. The entrance hall loomed ahead. A hand grabbed her arm. Lydia screamed, "Miss Hale!" Anne appeared from nowhere, eyes wide. "What's wrong?" Reed skidded to a stop on the stairs, his burned sleeve smoking. His face was a mask of fury that shifted instantly to concern when he saw Anne. "She startled me in the West Wing," he said smoothly. "I think she got disoriented. Perhaps the stress of the upcoming wedding." "I'm fine," Lydia pulled free of Anne's grip. "And I wasn't disoriented. Mr. Reed was threatening me." Anne looked between them, clearly torn. "That's absurd," Reed said. "Why would I threaten you?" Lydia held up the ledger. "Because of this." "What is that?" "Proof." She turned to Anne. "Where's Mrs. Harrow?" "In her office, but—" Lydia was already moving. She heard Reed start after her, heard Anne's confused questions, but she didn't stop until she'd thrown open Mrs. Harrow's door. The housekeeper looked up from her desk, expression shifting from surprise to alarm when she saw Lydia's face. "Lock the door," Lydia said. Mrs. Harrow stood. "What's happened?" "Lock it. Now." Mrs. Harrow crossed to the door, turned the key, just as Reed appeared in the hallway. He tried the handle, found it locked, and his mask of civility finally cracked. "This is ridiculous, Mrs. Harrow. Miss Hale is clearly unwell. Open the door." "Go away, Mr. Reed," Mrs. Harrow said calmly, "before I call the footman." His shadow lingered for a moment. Then footsteps retreated. Mrs. Harrow turned back to Lydia. "Talk." Lydia laid the ledger on the desk and explained everything. The inflated contracts, the ghost employees, the payment she'd found in the old Duke's study. Reed's confession, his threats. Mrs. Harrow listened without interrupting. When Lydia finished, the housekeeper opened the ledger and began reading, her expression growing darker with each page. £30,000, she murmured. "That bastard. What do we do?" "We send for his grace immediately." Mrs. Harrow moved to her desk, pulling out paper and pen. "He needs to know what's happening before Reed has a chance to cover his tracks, or what?" Mrs. Harrow's jaw tightened. "Or run. Men like Reed don't go down quietly. If he knows you have proof, he'll either destroy the evidence or destroy you." Fear spiked through Lydia's chest. "He can't destroy me. This house is full of people. People who've worked alongside Reed for years. People who might believe his version of events over yours." Mrs. Harrow finished the letter, sealed it, and rang for a footman. "You're new here, Miss Hale. An outsider. If Reed spreads the right rumors, says you're unstable, that you're fabricating accusations to cover your own mistakes, some of them will believe him." "But you believe me." "I do. But I'm one person." Mrs. Harrow handed the sealed letter to the footman who appeared at the door. "Take this to London, to His Grace, directly into his hands, no one else's. Ride hard." The footman nodded and disappeared. Mrs. Harrow turned back to Lydia. "You'll stay in your rooms until His Grace returns." Locked door. No visitors except Anne and me. That's a cage. That's survival. Mrs. Harrow's expression softened fractionally. "I know you hate this, but Reed is dangerous and we don't know who else might be involved. Until Rowan gets here, you're vulnerable." Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle this herself. But Reed's face in that dark room, the calculation in his eyes, the casual way he'd admitted to 30 years of theft, that had been real danger. The kind that didn't care about fairness or justice. "How long until Rowan gets here?" "If the footman rides through the night, 2 days. Maybe less if His Grace pushes hard." 2 days locked in her room while Reed plotted. 2 days wondering if every shadow held a threat. "Fine," Lydia said, "but I want that ledger somewhere safe. Not in my room where it can be stolen. Not in your office where Reed knows to look." Mrs. Harrow considered. "The Duchess's study. We'll lock it in the desk. I'll keep the key with me at all times." They moved together quickly and quietly. The ledger went into the desk's hidden drawer, the one Lydia had found filled with the late Duchess's private papers. Mrs. Harrow locked it and pocketed the key. "Now go," she said, "before Reed gets brave enough to come looking." Lydia made it back to her rooms without incident. Anne was waiting inside, her face pale. "Miss, what's happening? The staff are saying terrible things." "What kind of things?" "That you've gone mad, that you attacked Mr. Reed, that you're making accusations because you're scared of the wedding." Anne twisted her hands together. "I don't believe it, but others might." Lydia sank into a chair. "Perfect. He's already started." "Started what?" "Discrediting me." Lydia looked at Anne. "Tell me the truth. If it came down to my word against Reed's, who would the staff believe?" Anne hesitated too long. "That's what I thought." Lydia stood, pacing to the window. Outside, twilight was falling, turning the gardens into patches of darkness. "How many people here are loyal to Rowan?" "Most of them, I think. He's been a good master, better than his father ever was." Anne moved closer. "But Mr. Reed, he's been here so long. He knows everyone's secrets. And he's charming when he wants to be." "And I'm nobody. A girl who showed up a week ago claiming to be the next Duchess." "You are the next Duchess." "Not yet." Lydia turned from the window. "Anne, I need you to do something for me, something that might get you in trouble." "What is it?" "I need you to watch Reed, see who he talks to, where he goes, what he does, and report back to me." Anne's eyes widened. "You want me to spy?" "I want you to help me survive the next 2 days." Lydia crossed to her. "If Reed is planning something, if he's going to try to silence me before Rowan gets back, I need to know, please." Anne looked terrified, but she nodded. "I'll do what I can." "Thank you." After Anne left, Lydia locked the door and checked the windows. All secured. No easy way in. She should have felt safe. Instead, she felt trapped. The first day passed slowly. Anne brought meals and whispered reports. Reed had been seen talking to Ashworth in the stables. Both of them looked agitated. The staff were divided, some defending Lydia, others whispering that she was trouble. Lydia spent the time reading, pacing, and trying not to think about the fact that her entire future rested on Rowan believing her over a man who'd worked for his family for 20 years. What if he didn't? What if Reed was right, and she was just another transaction, disposable when she became inconvenient? Night fell. Lydia tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind against the windows felt like someone trying to break in. She was being paranoid, probably. Somewhere around midnight, she heard voices outside her door. Lydia sat up, heart pounding. The voices grew louder, male, angry, slurred with drink. "Can't just barge in there. Watch me." That was Reed, and he wasn't alone. Lydia scrambled out of bed, grabbing the fire poker from the hearth. It wasn't much, but it was something. The door handle rattled. "Miss Hale!" Reed's voice was too loud, too jovial. "Open up. Just want to talk." "Go away." Lydia gripped the poker tighter. "Or I'll scream." "Scream all you want. Most of the house is asleep, and the ones who aren't, they're with me." Laughter from whoever was with him. The handle rattled again, harder. Lydia backed toward the window, her mind racing. If they broke in, if Reed had brought allies, she couldn't fight them all. But she could escape. She unlocked the window, pushed it open. Cold air rushed in. Below, a narrow ledge ran along the side of the building. Beyond that, a drop of 30 feet to the gardens. Behind her, something heavy hit the door. Wood splintered. They were breaking it down. Lydia climbed onto the windowsill, her bare feet finding the ledge. It was barely 6 inches wide, slick with rain from earlier. Another crash. The door was giving way. She edged along the ledge, pressing herself against the cold stone wall. The wind tore at her nightgown. Below, darkness and the promise of broken bones. Behind her, she heard the door finally give way. Heard Reed's triumphant curse. "Where is she?" "The window's open." Footsteps rushed to the window. Lydia moved faster, not caring that she was shaking, that one wrong step would send her plummeting. The ledge curved around the corner of the building toward, she hoped, another window. "There!" Reed's voice carried on the wind. "She's on the ledge." "Forget her. We need to find that ledger." "Split up. You search the study. I'll make sure she doesn't make it back inside to talk." Ice flooded Lydia's veins. He was going to kill her. Maybe make it look like an accident. Tragic bride-to-be falls from window in the night. So sad. So preventable. She reached the corner, found another window. Locked. Behind her, Reed was climbing out onto the ledge. "You can't run forever, Miss Hale." Lydia grabbed a loose stone from the wall and smashed the window. Glass shattered, cut in her hand. She didn't care. She climbed through, tumbling into darkness. A bedroom. Empty. Unfamiliar. She ran for the door, yanked it open, and nearly collided with Mrs. Harrow. The housekeeper took one look at Lydia's bleeding hand, torn nightgown, and terrified face, and her expression went hard. "Where is he?" "On the ledge, coming for me." Lydia's voice shook. "He's going to kill me. He said—" "I heard what he said." Mrs. Harrow pulled Lydia behind her. "Get to the servants' stairs. Go to the kitchen. Lock yourself in the pantry, and don't come out until I get you." "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done years ago." Mrs. Harrow's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Trust me." Lydia ran, down the hallway, down the servants' stairs, narrow and dark. She could hear shouting above, but she didn't stop, just kept running until she reached the kitchen. The massive room was dark except for banked coals in the ovens. Lydia found the pantry, shoved herself inside, and locked the door from the inside. Then she waited. Minutes crawled by. She pressed her ear to the door but heard nothing except her own breathing. Had Mrs. Harrow stopped Reed, or had he— The pantry door rattled. Lydia bit back a scream. "Miss Hale, it's me," Mrs. Harrow's voice. Lydia unlocked the door with shaking hands. The housekeeper stood there, her hair mussed, a rip in her sleeve, but otherwise unharmed. "Is he—" "Locked in the wine cellar with 3 footmen guarding the door." Mrs. Harrow's expression was grim satisfaction. "Along with Ashworth and 2 other men who thought threatening you was a good idea." "How did you—" "I've been managing this house for 30 years. You think I don't know who's loyal and who's not?" She gestured for Lydia to follow. "Come on, you're sleeping in my quarters tonight, and we're posting guards outside." Lydia followed her through dark hallways, her mind still spinning. What happens now? Now we wait for his grace, and hope he gets here before Reed's friends decide to try something stupid. Mrs. Harrow glanced back. "You made powerful enemies tonight, Miss Hale. Reed has connections, people who profit from his schemes. This isn't over." "I know." They reached Mrs. Harrow's rooms, small but comfortable. The housekeeper pointed to the bed. "Sleep if you can. I'll be in the chair." You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Mrs. Harrow's expression softened. "You did what no one else had the courage to do. You exposed corruption that's been rotting this estate for decades. The least I can do is make sure you survive long enough to see it through." Lydia climbed into the bed, still shaking. Her cut hand throbbed. Her feet were scraped and bleeding from the ledge. But she was alive. She'd survived. "Mrs. Harrow," she said quietly, "why are you helping me?" The housekeeper was silent for a long moment. Then, "Because you remind me of someone. Someone who tried to fight back and lost. I won't let that happen again." The Duchess, Rowan's mother. She was fierce, brilliant, everything the old Duke wasn't, but she was trapped by marriage and duty and a husband who broke her piece by piece. Mrs. Harrow's voice was thick. I watched her fade, watched her spirit break. Swore if I ever got another chance to help someone like her, I wouldn't fail. I'm not her. No. You're stronger. You don't know it yet, but you are. Mrs. Harrow settled into the chair. Now sleep. His Grace rides hard when he's angry. He'll be here by morning. Lydia closed her eyes. Tried to believe that was true. Tried not to think about what would happen if Rowan didn't believe her. If he chose Reed over her. If this was all for nothing. Sleep came in fits and starts. Nightmares of falling, of Reed's hands around her throat, of Rowan's cold eyes as he sent her away. She woke to shouting. Lydia sat up, disoriented. Pale light filtered through the curtains. Dawn. The shouting was coming from downstairs, male voices, angry, overlapping. Mrs. Harrow was already at the door. "Stay here." Like hell, Lydia scrambled out of bed. "If that's Reed—" "It's not." Mrs. Harrow's expression was carefully neutral. "It's his Grace. He's back." Lydia's heart lurched. She followed Mrs. Harrow down to the entrance hall, where chaos reigned. Rowan stood in the center, still in riding clothes, covered in mud and rain. His face was a storm, fury and fear warring for dominance. Around him, footmen were restraining Reed and Ashworth, both of whom looked significantly worse than when Lydia had last seen them. Reed's lip was split. Ashworth had a black eye forming. Rowan's knuckles were bloody. His gaze swept the room and landed on Lydia. Everything stopped. For one terrible second, she couldn't read his expression. Then he crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was brief, barely a heartbeat, but real. His hands shook as they gripped her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, ragged. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." Reed tried. I know what he tried." Rowan's eyes were black with rage. "Mrs. Harrow's letter. And I ran into the footman you sent halfway to London. He told me everything." He turned back to Reed, his expression murderous. £30,000, he said quietly. 20 years of theft, conspiracy, and attempted murder. "Murder?" Reed laughed, high and desperate. "She fell. It was an accident." "She didn't fall. You chased her onto a ledge in the middle of the night." Rowan took a step closer. "You threatened her, tried to kill her to cover your crimes, and you involved my staff in your schemes." "Your father's schemes," Reed spat. "I learned from him. He built this system. I just maintained it." "My father was a drunk and a bastard, but at least he never pretended to be anything else." Rowan's voice dropped to something deadly. "You wore loyalty like a mask, made people trust you, then bled them dry." "And what are you doing to her?" Reed jerked his chin toward Lydia. "Selling her like property, using her to settle your father's debts. At least I'm honest about what I am. You're just a different kind of thief." Rowan hit him. The punch landed with a crack that echoed through the hall. Reed went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. "You don't get to talk about her," Rowan said. "You don't get to justify what you did. You're done." He turned to the footmen. "Take them to the magistrate, all of them, with the evidence Miss Hale found. Make sure they understand that any attempt to claim corruption or bribery will be met with the full weight of the Blackmore name." The footmen hauled Reed and Ashworth away, still protesting, still threatening. Then it was just Rowan and Lydia and Mrs. Harrow in the entrance hall. Rowan ran his hands through his hair, suddenly looking exhausted. "You should have waited for me," he said. "I didn't have time to wait." Lydia lifted her chin. "They were stealing from you, from the estate. I couldn't just ignore it. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. Because Mrs. Harrow saved you. Because you got lucky." His voice rose. "What if Reed had caught you in that study? What if he'd pushed you off that ledge? What then?" "Then I'd be dead. And you'd be free of this arrangement." The words came out sharper than she intended. "Isn't that what you wanted? A wife who didn't complicate things?" Rowan stared at her. "You think I wanted this? I think you wanted someone convenient, someone manageable, and I've been nothing but trouble since I got here. You've been—" He stopped, started again. "You've been brave, reckless, brilliant, and yes, trouble, but not the kind I regret." The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. Mrs. Harrow cleared her throat. "I'll just be elsewhere." She disappeared, leaving them alone. Rowan and Lydia stood in the entrance hall, 3 feet apart, neither willing to close the distance. "Why did you come back early?" Lydia asked. "Because the footman said you were in danger, and I—" He looked away. "I couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk you." "Because of the contract." "Damn the contract!" His eyes snapped back to hers, fierce and raw. "I came back because the thought of you hurt, of you scared and alone while I was 2 days away. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Just rode until the horse nearly collapsed." Lydia's breath caught. "This arrangement," Rowan continued, his voice rough, "was supposed to be simple. Business. Protection in exchange for your name. But you—" He laughed, bitter. "You walked into my house and turned everything upside down, found corruption I'd been too blind to see. Stood up to men who would have destroyed you without a second thought. Made me feel things I swore I'd never feel again." "What things?" He took a step closer, then another, until they were inches apart. "Fear," he said. "When I heard you were in danger, rage when I thought about someone hurting you, and something else, something I don't have a name for but feels like, don't, Lydia's voice broke. Don't say it if you don't mean it. I've never meant anything more in my life. He reached up, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted every hard edge of him. I'm falling for you, Lydia Hale, and I don't know what to do about it. The world tilted. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was a business arrangement, a transaction. Protection and safety in exchange for a name. Not this. Not his thumb brushing her cheek. Not his eyes, storm gray and desperate, searching hers. Not the way her heart was racing like she'd run a mile. Rowan! The door burst open. They sprang apart. A man strode in, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in expensive clothes that screamed wealth and power. Behind him, two others who looked like hired muscle. Your Grace, the man said, his smile sharp as knives. I heard you were back. We need to talk about your father's debts. Rowan's expression went cold. Lord Ashford's debts were settled years ago. Not all of them. The man's gaze slid to Lydia. And I believe this lovely creature is part of that settlement. The contract, Your Grace. I'm here to collect. Lydia's blood turned to ice. Who are you? She whispered. The man's smile widened. Vincent Caro. I'm the man who actually owns that contract. And you, my dear, are about to find out what happens when Blackmores try to cheat me. The entrance hall felt smaller with Vincent Caro in it. He carried himself like a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, shoulders back, chin high, eyes that cataloged everything and found most of it wanting. Rowan stepped between Caro and Lydia, his body a wall. You don't own anything, Caro. The contract was between my father and Harold Hale. You're not mentioned anywhere in it. Not in the version you have, perhaps. Caro pulled a folded document from his coat and tossed it onto the hall table. But that's because your father was very good at keeping secrets, just like Harold was good at borrowing money from multiple sources. Lydia's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means, Caro said, his smile never reaching his eyes, that 22 years ago Harold Hale came to me desperate. Your dear father, he nodded at Rowan, had agreed to forgive £30,000 in exchange for marrying his son to Hale's daughter, but Harold owed me $20,000 more, money I'd lent him years earlier with very specific terms. Terms that included my mother, Lydia said quietly. The pieces were falling into place, sharp and ugly. Your mother was collateral, yes. If Harold defaulted, which he did the moment he died, the debt passed to his estate, which means it passed to you. Caro's gaze raked over her like she was livestock at auction. The Blackmore contract promised you to their family, but my contract was signed first, which means legally you belong to me. People don't belong to people. Lydia's voice shook with rage. That's called slavery, and it's been illegal for decades. Debt collection isn't slavery, darling. It's business. Caro gestured to his men. You can come willingly, or my associates can persuade you. Either way, you're leaving with me today. Rowan moved so fast Lydia barely saw it. One moment he was standing still, the next he had Caro by the throat, slamming him against the wall hard enough to rattle the portraits. Touch her, Rowan said, his voice deadly calm, and I'll kill you. Slowly, publicly, in ways that will make your family name a cautionary tale. Caro's face was turning purple, but he managed to choke out words. Kill me, and you'll hang for murder. Maybe, but you'll still be dead. Rowan's grip tightened. And every court in England will call it justified when they learn you tried to abduct my fiancée. She's not your fiancée. She's mine. She's no one's. The new voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. A woman stood there, older, maybe 60, dressed in black traveling clothes with silver hair pulled back severely. She looked like she'd been carved from granite and left out in bad weather. Aunt Marjorie? Rowan's grip on Caro loosened fractionally. What are you doing here? Saving you from making a terrible mistake. Marjorie Blackmore swept into the room, her cane clicking on marble. Let him go, Rowan. Throttling creditors is beneath you. Rowan released Caro, who stumbled away gasping. Marjorie turned her attention to Lydia, looking her up and down with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Not the torn nightgown, the bandaged hand, the bare feet. So you're Harold Hale's daughter, the one causing all this fuss. Lydia lifted her chin. I didn't ask to be sold by my father. Twice, apparently. No, I don't suppose you did. Something that might have been approval flickered across Marjorie's face. But you're here now, which means you're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which. Both, probably. Lydia was too exhausted to pretend. Who are you? Rowan's aunt, his father's sister, and the person who actually read all the contracts before the old Duke signed them. Marjorie turned to Caro. Your document is a forgery, Vincent. A good one, but still fake. Caro's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. Marjorie crossed to the table, picked up Caro's contract, and held it to the light. The paper's right. The ink's aged correctly, but the seal, she tapped it with one finger, is wrong. My brother's seal had a flaw, a crack in the wax that appeared on every document he signed after 1798. This one doesn't have it. That proves nothing. It proves you're lying. Marjorie set down the document. Harold Hale did owe you money, but you never had a contract for his daughter. You heard about the Blackmore arrangement and decided to capitalize on it. Thought you could intimidate a grieving girl and a duke too busy to check his facts. Caro's jaw worked. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Marjorie pulled her own papers from her bag. Thick, yellowed, covered in spidery handwriting. These are the original contracts. All of them. Every debt Harold Hale owed, every agreement he signed. I've been collecting them for 20 years, waiting for this day. Why? Lydia asked. Because I knew Harold would die still owing half of England, and I knew vultures like Vincent would come circling. Marjorie's expression was flint. My brother was a drunk and a fool, but I won't let his mistakes destroy my nephew, or innocent girls caught in the crossfire. She spread the papers on the table. Here's the Blackmore contract, the real one, signed, sealed, witnessed, legal in every way. And here, she pulled out another document, is Harold's agreement with you, Vincent. £20,000 due on death, but no mention of collateral, no claim on his daughter, just money, which his estate doesn't have. Which means you get nothing, Rowan said, just like you deserve. Caro's face had gone from purple to white. I won't. You'll leave. Marjorie's voice could have cut glass. Now, before I have you arrested for fraud and attempted kidnapping, or would you prefer I send word to your creditors that you're struggling financially? I'm sure they'd love to know about the gambling debts you've been hiding. Caro opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes darted between Marjorie and Rowan, calculating odds. He was outmatched, and he knew it. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, Marjorie replied. It is. Caro and his men left, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Lydia's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the stairs, her hands shaking so badly she had to clench them together. Well, Marjorie said, studying her, you've had an eventful week. That's one word for it. Lydia's laugh came out broken. Are there any other contracts I should know about? Any other men who think they own me? Not that I'm aware of, but with Harold, you never know. Marjorie's tone softened fractionally. Your father was a coward and a cheat, but he did one decent thing in his miserable life. He made sure you'd be protected. The Blackmore contract wasn't just about debt. It was about keeping you safe from men like Caro. Safe, Lydia tasted the word. Is that what you call selling your daughter to strangers? No, I call it the best of bad options. Marjorie sat beside her on the stairs. Your father knew he was dying, knew his debts would fall on you. The Blackmore contract gave you a way out. Marriage to a powerful family, protection from creditors, a life better than anything Harold could provide. It wasn't kind, but it was pragmatic. I don't want pragmatism. I want choice. Then make one. Marjorie gestured at Rowan, who stood watching them with an expression Lydia couldn't read. The contract is real, legal, but contracts can be broken, for a price. If you want to walk away from this, I'll help you. Get you money, a new identity, passage to somewhere Harold's enemies won't find you. Lydia looked at Rowan, at the man who'd ridden through the night because he thought she was in danger, who'd hit Reed for threatening her, who'd stood between her and Caro without hesitation. Who'd said he was falling for her? And if I don't want to walk away? Marjorie's smile was sharp. Then you'd better be ready for a fight, because marrying into this family means dealing with their enemies, their debts, and their spectacularly poor life choices. It's not a fairy tale, girl. It's work. Hard, messy, complicated work. I'm used to work. Good. Marjorie stood, brushing off her skirts. Then let's discuss the wedding. 3 weeks isn't enough time for a proper ceremony, but we'll make do. You'll need a dress, invitations, a guest list. Wait. Lydia held up her hand. I haven't agreed to anything yet. Haven't you? Marjorie looked between her and Rowan. The way you two look at each other, I'd say the decision's already made. You're just too stubborn to admit it. She swept toward the door, leaving them alone again. Rowan sat down beside Lydia on the stairs. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, I meant what I said, before Caro showed up. Lydia's heart lurched. About falling for me? Yes. He turned to face her. I know this started as business, a transaction to solve our mutual problems. But somewhere between the rain and the ledgers and you nearly getting killed, it became real. You became real to me. I'm terrified, Lydia admitted. Of this, of you, of the fact that 3 weeks ago I was nothing, and now I'm supposed to be a duchess. You were never nothing. You were just invisible to people who didn't deserve to see you. Rowan reached for her hand, the bandaged one, and held it gently. You don't have to be afraid of me, Lydia. I won't hurt you, won't control you, won't make you into something you're not. What if I don't know what I am? Then we'll figure it out together. His thumb traced circles on her wrist. No more secrets, no more contracts made without your consent. Just us making decisions as partners, like we agreed. Partners. The word felt different now, less like a business term and more like a promise. I want to see it, Lydia said. The original contract, the one between your father and mine. Rowan hesitated. Why? Because I need to know exactly what I'm agreeing to, not the version you've told me, not what Marjorie says, the actual words. He stood, helping her up. Come on. They went to his study, a room Lydia hadn't seen before. Dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with maps and ledgers. He unlocked a cabinet and pulled out a metal box. Inside, the contract. Lydia read it slowly, her stomach twisting with each line. The language was cold, clinical. Her father had promised her like she was property, payment for debts he'd never had any intention of honoring on his own. But there was something else, a clause near the end that made her breath catch. The marriage may be dissolved, she read aloud, if both parties agree in writing that the arrangement has failed to provide mutual benefit and protection. She looked up at Rowan. You never mentioned this. I didn't think it mattered. It matters. Lydia set down the contract. It means I'm not trapped. If this doesn't work, if we make each other miserable, we can end it, legally. Is that what you want, an escape clause? I want honesty. She moved closer. You said you're falling for me, but what if you're wrong? What if this is just, I don't know, proximity and adrenaline and the fact that I'm not like the other women you know? It's not. How do you know? Because I've spent the last 3 days in London surrounded by exactly the kind of women I'm supposed to want. Beautiful, polished, connected. And all I could think about was getting back here. To you. His voice dropped. To the woman who smashed a window and climbed onto a ledge rather than let thieves win. Who stood up to Caro without flinching. Who looks at me like I'm a person, not a title. Lydia's throat tightened. I don't know how to be what you need. You already are. Rowan cupped her face with both hands. You're brilliant and fierce and completely terrifying, and I don't want you to change. I just want you to stay. The words hung between them. Lydia thought about running, about taking Marjorie's offer and disappearing into a new life. But she'd spent 22 years being invisible, being nothing. Here, she was something, someone who mattered, someone who'd exposed corruption and survived assassination attempts and stood her ground against men who thought they owned her. Here, she was becoming the person she was always meant to be. I'll stay, she said, but on my terms. Name them. The wedding happens in 3 weeks like you planned, but it's small, no spectacle, just family and staff. Agreed. And I want control of the household, Real control. Not just managing menus. I want to hire and fire staff, approve expenditures, make decisions without asking permission. Done. And this was the hard part. And I want you to be honest with me, always, even when the truth is ugly. No more protecting me from things you think I can't handle. Rowan was quiet for a beat. That goes both ways. You tell me when you're planning to break into locked rooms and confront thieves. Deal. Lydia held out her hand. He took it, pulling her close instead of shaking. One more condition. What? You let me court you, properly, for the next 3 weeks. His smile was small, uncertain. I know we're already engaged, but I want to do this right. Want you to know me before you marry me. Lydia's heart did something complicated in her chest. That's not a condition. That's a gift. Then accept it. She did the only thing that made sense. She kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it felt like a beginning, like a promise they were both choosing to make. When they broke apart, Rowan was smiling, actually smiling, not the cold mask he usually wore. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, Lydia echoed. The next morning, Lydia woke in her own bed, properly barricaded this time, with guards outside and windows locked. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the curtains. For the first time since arriving at Blackmore Hall, she felt like she could breathe. Anne appeared with breakfast and news. Reed and Ashworth are in custody, miss. The magistrate came this morning with constables, took statements from half the staff. Anne's smile was fierce. Everyone's talking about how you caught them, how you fought back. I mostly just survived. That's more than most people do. Anne set down the tray. And there's something else. His Grace has requested your presence in the blue drawing room. Says there's someone who wants to meet you. Lydia's stomach nodded. Who? He didn't say, but he looked happy, miss. I've never seen him look happy before. Lydia dressed quickly in one of the new gowns that had appeared in her wardrobe, deep green wool that actually fit. Pinned up her hair. Tried to look like someone who belonged in a duke's house. The blue drawing room was on the second floor, flooded with morning light. Rowan stood by the windows talking to a woman Lydia didn't recognize. Young, maybe 30, with dark hair and paint-stained hands. Both turned when Lydia entered. Miss Hale. The woman's smile was genuine. I've heard so much about you. I'm Catherine Winters. I run the girls' school in the village. Lydia blinked. The school? The one that doesn't exist yet, Catherine said, but will, if His Grace agrees to my proposal, and if you're willing to help. Rowan gestured for Lydia to sit. Catherine came to me 6 months ago with an idea, a school for girls who have nowhere else to go. Daughters of servants, orphans, girls from families too poor to afford education. She wanted to use the old dower house on the estate. I said no, Rowan continued, because I was focused on business and didn't have time for charity projects. But then you showed up and reminded me that intelligent women with nowhere to go end up trapped. He looked at Lydia. I don't want that for anyone, so I'm saying yes. The dower house is Catherine's, along with funding for teachers, supplies, everything she needs. That's generous, Lydia said carefully, but why are you telling me? Because I don't want it to be charity, Catherine said. I want it to be sustainable, self-supporting, which means we need someone who understands accounts and management, someone who can help us build something that lasts. Understanding dawned. You want me to help run it. I want you to be part of it, whatever that looks like for you. Catherine leaned forward. His Grace says you're brilliant with numbers, that you expose theft no one else caught. We need that kind of mind, someone who can make sure we don't waste resources or get taken advantage of by suppliers. Lydia looked at Rowan. You did this for me. I did it for every girl who deserves better than what the world gives her. His expression was soft. But yes, I thought you might like to be involved, only if you want to. Want barely covered it. Lydia had spent years managing a household, balancing books, solving problems no one else cared about. The idea of using those skills for something meaningful, helping girls like her find a way out. When do we start? She asked. Catherine's grin was brilliant. How about today? They spent the morning at the dower house, a beautiful old building that had been sitting empty for years. Catherine had plans, ideas, a curriculum that went beyond needlework and etiquette to include mathematics, reading, practical skills. I want them to have options, she explained as they walked through dusty rooms. Not just marriage or servitude. I want them to become shopkeepers, teachers, bookkeepers, people who can support themselves. That's ambitious, Lydia said. So is marrying a duke to escape your father's debts? Catherine's tone was matter-of-fact. We all do what we have to, might as well make it count. They talked for hours about budgets and staffing and how to convince local families to send their daughters. Catherine was smart, driven, unafraid to challenge Lydia's ideas or push back when something didn't make sense. By the time they returned to the main house, Lydia felt like she'd found something she didn't know she'd been looking for: purpose. A reason to stay that had nothing to do with contracts or protection or even Rowan. This was hers, something she could build. That evening, Rowan found her in the Duchess's study, surrounded by numbers and plans. "Catherine likes you," he said. "I like her too. She's terrifying. She reminds me of you." He sat on the edge of the desk. Stubborn, brilliant, completely unwilling to accept no as an answer. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." His smile was wry. "I have something for you." He handed her a small box. Inside, a ring. Not flashy, just a simple gold band with a single emerald. "It was my mother's," Rowan said quietly. "She wore it every day. Said it reminded her that even in the darkest times, there was still beauty worth fighting for." Lydia's throat tightened. "Rowan, you don't have to wear it if you don't want to. I just thought us." He stopped. Started again. "I want you to know this is real. Not a contract. Not a transaction. This is me asking you to marry me because I can't imagine a future without you in it." She slipped the ring onto her finger. Perfect fit. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want this. Yes to all of it." She stood, closing the distance between them. "I'm still terrified. Still not sure I know what I'm doing. But I want to figure it out with you." Rowan kissed her then, properly this time. Not the brief brush from before, but something deeper, more certain. His hands tangled in her hair. Her fingers gripped his shirt. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. 2 weeks and 6 days, he murmured. "Until what?" "Until I can call you my wife. Officially. Permanently." "Are you counting?" "Every second." The wedding preparations consumed the next 2 weeks. Marjorie took charge with the efficiency of a general planning a campaign. Invitations went out, small selective list. A dress was commissioned, simple but elegant, nothing like the ornate gowns Constance would have chosen. The staff threw themselves into preparations. Mrs. Harrow orchestrated meals like symphonies. The gardens were pruned and planted until they looked like something from a painting. And through it all, Rowan courted Lydia like he'd promised. Walks through the gardens where he told her about his childhood, the mother who'd protected him, the father who'd broken her. Dinners where they talked about books and politics and the future they were building. Quiet moments in the library where they worked side by side, comfortable in silence. He was teaching her to ride when the letter arrived. A footman brought it to the stables, his face pale. "Miss Hale, it's marked urgent." Lydia broke the seal, scanned the contents, and felt her blood turn to ice. "What is it?" Rowan asked. "It's from Constance." Lydia's voice shook. "She's challenging the marriage. Says the contract is void because I never gave consent. She's petitioning the courts to stop the wedding and claim my father's remaining assets. She can't do that." "She's doing it." Lydia handed him the letter. "And she's enlisted Beatrice to testify that I was coerced. That you forced me into this arrangement against my will." Rowan's expression went dark. "Then we fight back." "How? They're not wrong. I didn't consent to the original contract. My father signed it before I was born. And you did show up and drag me out of that house without asking what I wanted. But you chose to stay. Try proving that in court." Lydia paced away from the horses. "Constance is smart. She knows if she can break the contract, she can claim I'm entitled to a share of my father's estate. Which means she gets to control me again. I won't let that happen." "You might not have a choice." Lydia turned back to him. "If the courts side with her, If they decide this marriage is coerced, then we prove it's not. Rowan crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. We show them this is real. That you chose this. Chose me. How? His eyes blazed. By giving you the one thing Constance can't take away. Public acknowledgement. Witnesses who will testify that you're here by choice, not force. What kind of witnesses? Everyone. His smile was sharp. We move up the wedding. Do it this week. In the village church, with the whole county watching. Let them see you walk down that aisle willingly. Let them hear you say yes with your own voice. Then let Constance try to claim coercion. It was bold, reckless. Exactly what Lydia would have done. 3 days, she said. Can we pull it off in 3 days? If Marjorie has anything to say about it, yes. They did. Marjorie marshaled the staff like an army. Invitations were hand-delivered. The dress was finished in a marathon sewing session that lasted until dawn. The church was cleaned and decorated with whatever flowers the gardens could provide. And on the third day, with half the county packed into pews and the other half standing outside hoping for a glimpse, Lydia walked down the aisle on Mrs. Harrow's arm. She wore her mother's pearls, the only thing her father hadn't sold, carried wildflowers from the estate gardens, looked every single person in the eye as she passed. This was her choice, her future, her life. Rowan stood at the altar looking like he might stop breathing. When she reached him, he took her hand and held on like she was the only solid thing in the world. The vicar began the ceremony. Somewhere in the crowd, Lydia heard whispers, speculation, people wondering if this was real or just another Blackmore scandal. Then the vicar asked, Do you, Lydia Ann Hale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband of your own free will and choice? The church went silent. Lydia looked at Rowan, at the man who'd offered her protection and given her purpose, who'd believed in her when no one else did, who'd changed everything without even trying. I do, she said clearly, of my own free will, my own choice, because I want to. The whispers stopped. Rowan's grip on her hand tightened. And do you, Rowan Edward Blackmore, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. He didn't wait for the vicar to finish. Absolutely, without question, for as long as she'll have me. Someone in the back laughed. The vicar smiled. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Rowan kissed her before the vicar could give permission, pulling her close and kissing her like they were the only two people in the world. The church erupted in applause. When they broke apart, Lydia was laughing. Actually laughing, bright and free and unburdened. They walked back down the aisle together, out into sunlight, into a future neither had planned, but both had chosen. And in the crowd, watching with fury that could have burned the church down, stood Constance and Beatrice. Lydia met her stepmother's eyes, smiled, and kept walking. The reception at Blackmore Hall was already underway when Constance made her move. Lydia was standing near the windows of the ballroom, watching guests dance and toast and celebrate, when she felt the shift in the room. Conversations stuttered, people turned, a path cleared through the crowd like water parting. Constance walked through it, Beatrice trailing behind like a reluctant shadow. Both were dressed in mourning black, a calculated choice meant to remind everyone that Harold Hale was barely cold in the ground. How theatrical, Marjorie muttered from Lydia's elbow. She's going to make a scene. Let her. Lydia's voice was steadier than she felt. I'm done being afraid of her. Constance stopped in the center of the ballroom, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on Lydia. I need to speak with my stepdaughter, privately. Anything you have to say to my wife, Rowan said, appearing at Lydia's side, you can say in front of witnesses. Fine. Constance's smile was razor thin. Then I'll say it plainly. This marriage is a farce built on coercion and lies, and I intend to prove it. The room went silent. You already tried that, Lydia said. The wedding happened anyway. Half the county watched me say yes. A performance, Constance gestured dismissively. You've been living here for weeks, isolated, under his control. Of course you said what he wanted you to say. That doesn't make it genuine consent. I consented because I wanted to marry him. Did you? Or did you consent because you had no other options? Constance's voice rose. You had no money, no prospects, no family willing to take you in. The Duke of Ashford offers you safety in exchange for your name, and you expect everyone to believe that's love? That's not romance. That's survival. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lydia could see the doubt on some faces, the questions forming. Rowan stepped forward, his expression dangerous. You need to leave. Not until I've had my say. Constance pulled papers from her reticule. I have statements here, from servants at Hale Manor who witnessed how you dragged Lydia from her home, from neighbors who saw her distress, even from Mr. Pemberton, who admits the contract was signed without her knowledge or consent. The contract was signed 22 years ago, Marjorie said sharply. Lydia wasn't consulted because she wasn't born yet. That's not coercion, that's how arranged marriages work. Arranged marriages, Constance countered, require the consent of both parties once they're of age. Lydia never gave that consent. She was forced into this situation by circumstances beyond her control. I was forced into it by my father's debts, Lydia said clearly. Debts you knew about, Constance. Debts you helped hide while you spent his money and pretended everything was fine. Constance's expression flickered. I did no such thing. You did. Lydia moved forward, away from Rowan's protective presence. You knew he was bankrupt, knew creditors were circling, but you kept spending, new dresses, new furniture, parties you couldn't afford, all while telling me I was worthless and should be grateful for the roof over my head. That's a lie. Is it? Lydia pulled her own papers from her sleeve, copies she'd made from the ledgers. Here's the household accounts from the last 5 years. Expenses tripling while income stayed flat. Bills going unpaid while you bought Beatrice a new wardrobe every season. And here, she unfolded another page, is the letter you wrote to my father's solicitor 3 months before he died, asking if you'd inherit if something happened to him. Gasps from the crowd. Constance's face went white. Where did you get that? From the same place I found proof that you knew about the Blackmore contract, that you'd planned to use it to control me, keep me dependent so you could claim my father's assets through me. Lydia's voice was ice. You didn't want me to have choices, Constance. You wanted me to be trapped so you could use me as leverage. That's not... I never... You did. Beatrice's voice was small but clear. Mother, you did. Everyone turned. Beatrice stood apart from Constance, her hands twisting together, her face pale but determined. You told me, when father was dying, you said if we could keep Lydia under our control, we could claim part of whatever settlement the Blackmores offered, that she was worth more married than single. Beatrice, be quiet. No. Beatrice's voice strengthened. I'm done being quiet. Done helping you hurt people. She looked at Lydia. I'm sorry for everything, for being cruel, for pretending you didn't matter. You deserved better. The apology hung in the air like something fragile. Lydia didn't know what to say. Didn't know if she could forgive years of casual cruelty just because Beatrice had finally grown a spine. But she nodded. Once. Acknowledgement, if not absolution. Constance looked between them, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. You're all turning against me. After everything I've done, everything you've done, Rowan said quietly, has been for yourself. You used Harold's debts to position yourself as the grieving widow while plotting to exploit his daughter. You challenged this marriage not to protect Lydia, but to maintain control over her. And now you're standing in my house at my wife's wedding reception, trying to destroy her reputation because you can't stand that she escaped. She hasn't escaped anything. She's just traded one prison for another. Constance's smile was bitter. You think marriage to a duke makes her free? She's still property, still a transaction, just with better furniture. No. Lydia stepped forward until she was inches from Constance. I'm not property, not yours, not my father's, not even Rowan's, despite what the law says. I'm a person who made a choice. Maybe not the choice I would have made if the world was fair, but it was mine. A choice made under duress? Every choice women make is under duress. Lydia's voice cracked with fury. We can't own property, can't control our own money, can't vote or work most professions or exist without a man's permission. So yes, I chose marriage to escape poverty, chose protection over independence because independence isn't actually an option for women like me. But I chose the best version of a bad situation, and I chose it with my eyes open. The ballroom was silent. You wanted me to stay small, Lydia continued. Stay invisible, stay nothing, so you could use me however you wanted. But I'm done being nothing. I'm the Duchess of Ashford now, and you have no power over me anymore. She turned to the crowd. Everyone here heard me consent to this marriage, heard me say yes of my own free will. If anyone doubts that, if anyone believes I was coerced, speak now. No one spoke. Constance looked around wildly, searching for allies, found none. This isn't over, she hissed. Yes, Marjorie said. It is. You lost. Accept it with whatever grace you can muster and leave before I have you thrown out. Constance drew herself up, trying to salvage dignity from the wreckage. Beatrice. We're leaving. But Beatrice didn't move. I'm not going with you. What? I said I'm not going with you. Beatrice's voice was shaking but firm. I'm tired of being your weapon, your pawn. I want... She swallowed hard. I want to be better than you raised me to be. Constance stared at her daughter like she was a stranger. Then, without another word, she turned and swept from the ballroom, her black skirts trailing like a funeral shroud. The crowd erupted in whispers. Lydia felt her knees go weak. Rowan caught her elbow, steadying her. That was terrifying, she murmured. That was brilliant. His smile was fierce with pride. You just dismantled her in front of half the county. I might throw up. Later. Right now, you need to smile and pretend you're not shaking. Lydia managed to laugh, turned to face the crowd. Let them see her standing, not broken, not defeated, not nothing. Marjorie raised her glass. To the Duchess of Ashford, who just proved she's more Blackmore than most of us by blood. The crowd echoed the toast. Lydia caught Beatrice's eye across the room. Her half-sister looked lost, uncertain, like she'd just cut herself free from anchor lines and didn't know how to swim. Beatrice, Lydia called. Beatrice approached cautiously. You meant what you said? About wanting to be better? Yes, I think so. Beatrice's voice was small. I don't know how, but I want to try. Lydia thought about all the cruelty, all the years of being invisible while Beatrice shone, all the reasons she had to turn her half-sister away. Then she thought about the girls' school, about girls who needed chances they weren't given. Catherine Winters is opening a school, Lydia said, for girls with nowhere else to go. She needs teachers, people willing to work for something meaningful instead of just existing. Beatrice blinked. You're offering me a position? I'm offering you a chance. What you do with it is up to you. Lydia paused. But if you hurt those girls, if you treat them the way you treated me, you're done. Understand? I understand. Beatrice's eyes were bright with tears. Thank you. She slipped away into the crowd. Rowan pulled Lydia close, his arm around her waist. You didn't have to do that. I know, but holding on to hate takes energy I'd rather spend elsewhere. Like where? Like building something that matters. She turned in his arms. The school is a start, but I want more. I want to change things. What kind of things? The system that made women like me disposable, that forces us to choose between survival and dignity. Her voice was fierce. I want to help women get education, training, ways to support themselves. I want to give them options so they don't have to marry out of desperation. Rowan studied her face. That's ambitious. So is marrying a stranger to escape poverty. Lydia smiled. I'm told I'm good at ambitious. You are. He kissed her forehead. And I'll help however I can. Money, connections, whatever you need. Why? Because you're right. The system is broken. And if we have the power to fix even a small part of it, we should. The music started again. Couples moved onto the dance floor. Rowan held out his hand. Dance with me, Duchess. Lydia took it. Let him pull her into the crowd, into the music, into a waltz she barely knew the steps to. I'm terrible at this, she warned. I don't care. They danced anyway, stumbling and laughing and not caring who was watching. And for the first time in her life, Lydia felt like she belonged somewhere. The days after the wedding blurred together in a haze of planning and building and learning how to be married to someone who actually wanted her opinion. Rowan was gone during the days, handling business in London, meeting with investors, managing the empire that paid for everything. But he came home every evening, asked about her day, listened when she talked about the school or the estate or her ideas for reform. They were learning each other. The way Rowan took his coffee black and never ate breakfast. The way Lydia couldn't sleep without reading first. The way they both had nightmares sometimes. Him about his father, her about being invisible again. They were learning how to be partners. Not the business arrangement they'd started with, but something real and messy and complicated. And slowly, Blackmore Hall transformed. The staff, sensing the shift, came to Lydia with problems they'd hidden for years. Broken systems, inefficiencies. Mrs. Harrow brought her the accounts and admitted she'd been covering shortfalls for months. The estate's been bleeding money for a decade, she said. Between the old Duke's drinking and Reed's theft, we're barely staying afloat. Lydia spent 2 weeks buried in ledgers, finding waste, renegotiating contracts, cutting expenses that made no sense. It was harder than exposing Reed. This was surgery on a living system, not hunting down a thief. But she was good at it. By the end of the month, the estate was stable. Not profitable yet, but functional. The staff were being paid on time. Suppliers were happy. The books balanced. Rowan came home one evening and found her in the study, surrounded by papers. "You fixed it," he said, reading over her shoulder. "I stabilized it. Fixing it will take years." She leaned back in her chair. "But yes, we're solvent." He pulled her up, spinning her around. "You're incredible. I'm competent. There's a difference." "No, you're incredible." He kissed her. "And I'm lucky you're on my side." "Where else would I be?" His expression sobered. "I keep waiting for you to realize you made a mistake, that you could have done better than marrying a man too damaged to know how to love you properly." Lydia cupped his face. "You love me fine, better than fine. You give me space to breathe and work to do that matters, and trust I didn't earn. That's more than most women get in a lifetime of marriage. I want to give you more. Then give me time. Give me patience while I figure out how to be a duchess and a wife and a person all at once." She smiled. "We have the rest of our lives. We don't have to solve everything today." He kissed her again, slower this time. "The rest of our lives. I like the sound of that." The school opened in the spring. 20 girls arrived the first day, daughters of servants, orphans from the village, a few from families too poor to feed them. They ranged from 8 to 16, each with their own story of loss and survival. Catherine ran the curriculum. Beatrice, who'd proven herself steady and patient, taught reading and etiquette. And Lydia managed the finances, making sure every shilling was spent wisely. It was chaos at first. Girls who'd never been in a classroom disrupting lessons, supply shortages, arguments over rules and schedules. But slowly, it worked. The girls learned, grew, started believing they could be more than what the world expected. 6 months in, Lydia was reviewing accounts when one of the older students knocked on her office door. "Your Grace, may I speak with you?" The girl was maybe 15, tall and thin, with clever eyes and nervous hands. "Of course. What's your name?" "Emma, Your Grace. Emma Watts." She twisted her fingers together. "I wanted to thank you, for the school, for giving us a chance." "You're welcome. But you should thank Miss Winters. She's the one who made this happen." "I did thank her, but you're the one who pays for it. Who makes sure we have books and supplies and teachers?" Emma's voice was fierce. "My mother was a servant, worked herself to death for a family that barely noticed she existed. I was supposed to end up the same way. But now," she gestured at the room, the school, the future, "now I have options. Because of you." Lydia's throat tightened. "What will you do after you finish here?" "I want to be a teacher, like Miss Beatrice. Help other girls like me." Emma smiled. "Is that foolish?" "No, that's exactly what we hoped for." After Emma left, Lydia sat in the quiet office, letting herself feel the weight of what they'd built. This wasn't just a school. It was proof that the system could change, that women could have choices beyond marriage or servitude. It was the beginning of something bigger. That evening, she told Rowan about Emma, about her plans to expand the school, add more students, maybe open a second location. "We need more funding," she said. "More staff, more space." "Then we'll get it." Rowan looked up from the letter he'd been reading. Actually, I have an idea about that. What kind of idea? The old manor, your father's house. He set down the letter. It's been sitting empty since the creditors seized it. I could buy it back, convert it into a school, a larger one than the dower house. Lydia's breath caught. Turn the place that tried to erase me into something that helps girls like me? Exactly. His smile was sharp. Plus, it would drive Constance insane knowing we're using it for charity. That's petty. I'm aware. Lydia laughed. Do it. Buy the house, convert it, fill it with girls who deserve better than what the world gave them. Consider it done. 3 months later, they stood in front of Hale Manor, no longer a prison, but a promise. Workers were already gutting the inside, tearing down walls, making space for classrooms and dormitories. Strange being back here, Lydia said. Do you regret it, coming back? No. She looked at the building that had tried to make her nothing. I regret nothing about this. About us. About what we're building. Rowan took her hand. What we're building is a legacy, not just for us, for every girl who needs it. That's dramatic. You make me dramatic. He pulled her close. You make me want to be better. Do better. Change the world because you believe it can be changed. I don't believe it can be changed. I just refuse to accept it the way it is. That's the same thing. Maybe it was. They stood there in the shadow of the house that had tried to break her, planning the future they were building together. And Lydia realized something. She'd spent her whole life being told she was nothing, being invisible, being erased. But she'd never been nothing. She'd just been waiting for the moment when she could show the world what she actually was. Fierce, brilliant, unbreakable. A woman who'd turned loss into leverage, survival into strength, and a forced marriage into something resembling love. She wasn't the girl who was nothing anymore. She was the Duchess of Ashford, wife, partner, builder of futures. And she was just getting started. The transformation of Hale Manor took a year. When it finally opened, it housed 60 girls, double the capacity of the first school. They came from all over England, brought by families who'd heard about the place where daughters could learn trades, mathematics, reading, practical skills, where they could become more than servants or wives. The opening ceremony drew crowds. Local gentry came out of curiosity, families came out of hope, and standing in the front row looking uncomfortable but determined was Beatrice. She'd proven herself at the first school. Turned out she was patient with children, good at explaining things, willing to put in the work. Catherine had made her head teacher. Now she stood ready to help run the second location. Lydia caught her eye across the crowd. Beatrice smiled, tentative but real. Progress, Lydia thought. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But progress. The ceremony was simple. Catherine spoke about education and opportunity. Marjorie donated a substantial sum and challenged the other gentry to match her. Rowan stood beside Lydia, his hand in hers, his pride evident. Then Lydia stood to speak. She looked at the crowd, at faces skeptical and supportive, curious and critical. This building, she said, used to be a prison. My prison. The place where I was told I was worthless. Where I learned that being a woman meant being invisible unless someone needed you to serve them. Silence. But prisons can be torn down, rebuilt, turned into something better. She gestured at the manor behind her, transformed, beautiful, full of possibility. This isn't just a school. It's proof that the stories we're told about ourselves, about what we can be, what we're worth, those stories can be rewritten. She looked at the girls lined up in their new uniforms, eyes bright with hope. You are not nothing. You are not invisible. You are brilliant and capable and worthy of every opportunity the world tries to deny you. Her voice strengthened. And this place exists to make sure you get those opportunities, to make sure you can build futures you choose instead of futures chosen for you. Applause rippled through the crowd. Lydia stepped back, her part done. But as the ceremony continued, she felt Rowan's hand tighten on hers. You did it, he murmured. Changed everything. We did it, she corrected. Together. Together, he agreed. That night, back at Blackmore Hall, they stood in the library where it had all begun, where Rowan had offered her a bargain and she'd been too desperate to refuse. Do you ever regret it? Lydia asked. That night, making that offer. Every day, Rowan said. She turned, stung. He smiled. I regret that I didn't ask instead of demand, that I treated you like a solution instead of a person, that I wasted time being afraid of what I felt instead of just telling you. And what do you feel? Love? Absolute, terrifying, complicated love. He pulled her close. You were supposed to be a convenient arrangement. Instead, you became the only thing that matters. That's dramatic again. I know. You bring it out in me. He kissed her forehead. I love you, Lydia Blackmore. Not because you saved my estate or exposed corruption or built schools, but because you're fierce and brilliant and refuse to accept the world the way it is. Because you make me want to be better. Because you're you. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too, even though you dragged me out of my father's house in the rain and terrified me for weeks. Especially because of that? Maybe a little because of that. She kissed him properly. You gave me a chance to be more than nothing. That's worth a lot of terror. They stood there in the library holding each other, two people who'd found something real in the middle of a transaction. Outside rain started again, soft and steady, washing everything clean. And Lydia thought about the girl she'd been, the one who'd inherited nothing, who'd been invisible and forgotten and erased. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who'd taken the worst the world offered and turned it into something worth having, someone who'd learned that you didn't have to accept the stories people told about you. You could write your own instead. 5 years later, the network had grown to 7 schools across England. Hundreds of girls had passed through the programs. Some became teachers, others shopkeepers, bookkeepers, nurses. A few even went on to universities that were just starting to accept women. The system was changing, slowly, painfully, but changing. And at the center of it all was Lydia, Duchess of Ashford, patron of the schools, advocate for women's education. She'd become the thing she'd needed most when she was young, proof that invisible girls could become visible women. Rowan had kept his promise, given her space to work, resources to build, trust to make her own decisions. Their marriage had become something neither expected. Partnership in the truest sense. Equals working toward the same goals. They fought sometimes, disagreed on strategy or spending or how to handle opposition, but they fought as partners, not adversaries. And at night, when the work was done, they came back to each other, to the library where it started, to the quiet moments that made everything else worthwhile. The girl who was nothing, Rowan said one evening, watching Lydia review plans for the 8th school. She looked up. What? That's what they called you, at your father's will reading. The girl who inherited nothing. They weren't wrong. I didn't inherit anything. You're wrong about that. He crossed to her, tilting her chin up. You inherited your mother's strength, your father's stubborn refusal to quit, and somewhere in all that mess you found yourself, the person you were always supposed to be. I found us, Lydia corrected. I found a partnership that let me become that person. Then I'm grateful for desperate bargains made in the rain. Rowan smiled. Because they led me to you. Lydia stood, moving into his arms. Outside, no rain this time, just stars and clear skies and the promise of tomorrow. The girl who was nothing, she murmured against his chest, became everything she needed to be. Not because someone gave it to her, but because she took it. And the Duke who needed a convenient wife, Rowan replied, found the love of his life instead. That's so dramatic. I know, but it's true. It was. They'd started with a contract, a transaction, a marriage of convenience built on debts and desperation. But they'd built something real from those broken pieces, something lasting, a legacy of schools, of changed lives, of girls who learned they were worth more than the world told them, and a love that had survived coercion and danger and the weight of expectations. The girl who was nothing had become a duchess, a reformer, a woman who changed the system that tried to erase her. She'd inherited nothing from her father, but she'd built everything from that nothing, and that made all the difference.